Alrighty. Let's see here. Oop. And then... Okay. And... Boom. I exist. Don't I? Yeah. Oh. Oh, that's interesting. One moment. Ah, I exist for real this time. There we go. I apologize for any background noise that the microphone picks up this evening. Um, People are outside mowing and like weed eating and stuff. And I'm near the edge of the house, so they'll probably be picked up. I could already hear them when I was waiting on, or I was getting everything ready. I don't know if the microphone will pick it up or not. Um, so, if you hear weird noises, that would be the reason. At the very least, they're setting off our motion, so you might hear the chimes from that. So, this evening, I'm intending to work more on the zone system, which is what we were working on last time. It's what allows us to get like specialty movement. And right now, we've kind of got it starting to work. Like he goes and he won't do it again once it's happened once, which is a little strange. So I do have to figure that part out. But the other issue is that as of right now, he enters the movement mode and he gets to here, which should then allow me to move up and down, except he immediately executes a let go. Before, he was immediately, when I was working on this off stream, he was immediately executing a jump left, which was strange, and so I had to make some changes into how I processed that. Specifically, I had to make adjustments to this because we had everything as defaulting like a threshold of 0, and that meant that it was detecting even small movement. In this case, we're not even using movement detection, but we are detecting modes, and we got some ores and stuff going on here, so I think there's probably a couple things happening. The first is possibly that when the character enters the zone, that they still technically are executing a movement, like or they still have momentum. So what I'm thinking is that we should probably execute we can put it on here. Stop movement immediately. And we'll see if this makes a difference on its own. Because that could be enough to like tell the character that it's not to do anything further. I don't think that's going to be the case, but we shall see. No, in fact, it almost seems to violently launch him off of there, which is even stranger. Oh, 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 uh, okay. That was definitely a thing we weren't supposed to be doing. I don't know if that was, because it didn't do it the very first time we tested it. I don't know if that was just a fluke, that he had enough like momentum or something to launch the character through the physics there, but I could be mistaken. Let's try there. I'm going to replace this rule for the moment, or at least this part of the rule. With our pawn movement mode. Where the heck is it? Try this. The only thing I could think because it wouldn't have transitioned yet. We'll set it like that for now. That was my first thought. Then I was like, oh, well then, because it has to confirm that to allow it to enter this one, that doesn't technically necessarily work, because we may not have, we're probably not going to be in that falling mode. We'll see. We'll see, because at this point that might mean that he just won't execute the let go. Ooh, okay. Is that just a thing that we're doing now? Okay, let me put that back on. And see. I mean, the only thing I could think to do here, maybe changing that away from a not Boolean. Into just straight up a equals false situation. That should functionally be the same thing, but since in truth it's more of a is opposite kind of situation. Okay, we still launch right off. However, we don't immediately catapult into the void through the ground collision. Let's try that again, see if that was just like a fluke that we didn't. Okay. Interesting. I mean, let's try something. It should never enter this in this case. I'm just curious. I never changed over the music. There we go. Okay, now that functionally does the same thing for some reason. All right. Interesting. There is a code level change I could look at making and see how that does. Because there's a function involved with the zones. All right, let's see. Then let's close this. And I'm gonna go ahead because I did make some changes before. And even though these did not work, no, I don't want to commit them yet. I was going to say not committing, I want to make it easier to roll back, but like roll back to this state if what I'm about to do doesn't work at all. Let's see. Not that one. This one. Okay, so we're returning there. Is valid now. Let's add Boolean for is auto boundary transition. And we're going to set that to the be already in zone. Oh wait, no we can't. I don't think we can do that yet. Hang on. Right that. Last pending transitions get there. We've set our zone. Transition is valid now. In here is where we want to set equals is in zone. Then we can do a constant bool. We do B is auto boundary transition. And what we're doing here, no, not that. What we're doing here is basically we want to see if, or we want to basically compare the zone that we're in to the zone that's coming up, which it can do by like detecting the edges of the zones and what's nearby. That's kind of already built into that zone system. And so then what it'll do is essentially treat that as like a, it's like an alert that it's going to have. And so it can compare the two. And that means that because we do want things like let go to be able to be executed if we're moving from one zone to another. Because there are scenarios where you might have two zones, even if they're the same zone technically, that you might transition between. Like if you had two ladders side by side, but one's like higher up and you're going to climb up one and jump over, that kind of thing. Those would be two next to each other. So then once we have that, we can do if not auto transition, then we can do these broadcasts. Else, yeah, that should work. I have to build it. So yeah, so basically there's two scenarios. It's checked because it can only be an auto boundary transition if it is, you're already in a zone and the zone does not, that it's detecting does not equal the zone you're currently in. Now, there's still the concerning factor of why it does not allow us to have subsequent triggers on a zone. So I still need to look into that. but I want to get the zone working first, because that, once we can get the zones functioning, like basically once we can get ladder functioning, the other types of zones should be significantly simpler to introduce, for one, and then for two, debugging something like it only being able to be executed on the initial time without restarting the game is a much simpler task as well. That's a smaller issue. You could basically brute force that if you couldn't find the actual reason. Especially because, like, right now, I'm solely using auto entry on the ladder, which is not how I would do it. You know, my intention long term is that you interact with the zone to enter it. So you'll have a prompt. Right now, it's on auto entry. As soon as we overlap with the zone, we enter it. And that's purely for testing purposes. But it could be that is where there's an issue with it being able to re-trigger. But I'm not looking into that just yet. I want to get the actual functionality of the zone. I want to get him climbing that ladder. That's like priority one. It's gonna take it a minute to start up all this. Now, if that change now results in us launching off, I honestly am not certain of what the cause could be. Okay. Getting loaded back in there. It's going to take a second for it to do what it needs to do here. All right. Let's see what happens. Okay. Okay, we're still getting launched off. And we still cannot re-execute. What was it? It was failing to load something? What was going on? Well-defined object. What are you talking about? Weird. Okay. I was very curious. I mean, I guess I could do that, and then you can't toggle these, can you? Doesn't seem like it. Let me move this over. Once that's done there, yeah. I'll move this over to my other screen so I can watch it while we run this. Attach the debug to the preview instance. Okay. And then approach. It happened so fast. Interesting. I think I know why it never... Hang on. I think I know why it never allows me to do this. I like force change the value? Okay. Weird. I was hoping to like re-trigger it by like just force changing the value to see if that re-triggered. It doesn't appear to. If I remove this part, because like arguably the pending transition stuff is not seeming to work. What does that do for me here? If anything, does it change the behavior at all? No, actually. There's no change in that behavior. But zone changed. Guess it could be. Could it be because it's because I'm pulling that from the cached zone? I wouldn't think that this is the issue. Hello, reality. I'm doing alright. I'm trying to fix a weird problem. I say fix as if it was ever working right to begin with. It wasn't. Right now, he auto ejects himself from a ladder. And it seems to have to do with... Let me go ahead and just do this, because this didn't make a difference either way. So I'm going to put that back how it was. The issue seems to stem from zone changed never getting cleared. But zone changed let's see. is set here based on the pending transition. And this is updated every tick. Wait. Hang on. What? That's not right. I might have just found my problem. I need to check the original adventure kit stuff and see. Not that. Character blueprints. This guy. Oh, it opened on my other screen. So this one. Event graph. Zone and transitions. Yeah, no, that's how it sets that. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but that is how it sets that. Interesting. I guess let me pull this over here on my other screen where I can look at them side by side. I wonder. Could there be an issue with the pending transition struct? I can toggle a breakpoint here. So I guess this thing's gonna go nuts with me doing that, but I'm gonna toggle that breakpoint, and then that will let me monitor that value. It's gonna do this. It's gonna tick this every second, and the whole thing's gonna go nuts. Yeah, that's about what I thought was gonna happen. Yep. Okay, I'm gonna untoggle just so that we can freaking move. And then actually what I'm gonna do is watch the value. Zone changed. Okay, but then once it changes, pending transition is valid. Is I guess not being cleared? But that would come from the character. It's lagging because I have it searching for a value. Okay, pending transition. Where all is that getting used? Character transition started. There's this. But this is only meant to happen specifically with a zip line. Let me look at this other for a character. Okay. So for the base character, big graph, boop, boop, and then right tick graph. No. Okay. I don't. That's speed and velocity. I guess. I don't think this is going to be related at all, but it could. It could be. That, I don't think that's gonna have anything to do with it, but I guess it could, simply because the movement is a looped animation. Nope. It's doing the weird thing where it launches us off again. It seems like pending transition, the structure never updates. So it, like, is valid and it never updates, seemingly. Because I watched this value and I never once saw it change after the first time. We got an ad break. Okay, I do believe we are back from the ad break. Okay, so let me run through this again, just to confirm my theory. Okay, so everything's ticking. It hits its first. Oh! It didn't freak out. I can't climb, but it didn't freak out. Okay. Let's go into our zones. Movement states. We're in ladder. So, in order to step up, we need why is there no debug data for that? That's strange. Watch this value. Watch this value. All right. Okay. Local Z acceleration appears to be... What? Okay. I'm pressing W and S instead of A and D, and it reads the data. So that part is hitting true, but our zone changed is true, but we also need so we got, well, it says false here, but it was saying true when I press up. We got true here. We need these guys to be true. And for some reason, we're seeing no data on the cached struct, which is strange. Because that would... Yeah, upward. Update cached by direction. Which it does if the character is valid. Find references by name. Okay, well that should 100% be updating, so that part I'm not concerned about. But then... Okay, this is updating, fine. Weird. Why are those considered not in scope? If zone's not valid, so no transition without a zone. Okay, it didn't pop me out of it before. Why did that behavior suddenly change? Interesting. I, di- I didn't change anything. Hmm. Hello, walls. Why? Why would that not be? Ooh, ah. Well then, how's accuracy going? Well, I'm working on a different thing. Although the shooting accuracy is actually improved. I have a different problem, as you see, going on right now. Oh, I let us fall too long. Now I don't. There it is. There's the level. That's cool, BRB. All right. Why? Any chance at all that the gun makes a difference? Nope. It just knocks us out. Okay. Why? Because this uses that to get its data. But that can only work when there's a zone. It triggers it for like a moment, which is strange. I wonder if that's the issue. Because what it's basically doing is when it's not updating, it's running to here, and if we're not actually interacting with one of the movement zones, it's hitting not valid and going down here, and that's fine. That's accurate behavior. What I did notice, though, is when it does trigger on a zone, for like an instant, it pops across. But it then doesn't execute back across there, which is strange. I'm gonna toggle this so that I can at least catch it in that brief moment when it's triggered. Um, that explains the not in scope, because that's interesting. All of a sudden it's doing other weird things. Okay, the zone's accurate there. Get possible transition. And then it reads possible transition return value unknown. I wonder. It's also the. I thought I had fixed its jumping to the side thing. That's a new behavior. Why is that a new behavior? Okay. I've let go. Maybe it's because I was pressing the button as I entered. Alright, so we've hit this state. And I guess maybe that's the issue, is that get possible transition queries all possible transitions zone has for the character. This is a function of the Adventure Kit plugin, so this is not a function that I wrote. This is valid. Our character's valid. Our zone is valid. World position, world direction, jump false. Now, what it should be finding is the step up position or transition. I believe, at least. Because the funny thing about the ladders is how they build their transitions. Is you have a step builder, which is considered a transition. So I mean, the only thing other thing I can think to do is make sure that, but the male character is extended from the base character, so that shouldn't matter. Like, actually should not matter. Rebuild all transitions. No, it still reads. Yeah, and that's a C++ definition. Please don't open Visual Studio, for the love of God. So I can't look at it directly in Blueprint. I'll have to go into the code of the plugin to mess with that at all. Now, what it could be having issues with could be the step builder, potentially. I don't know why it would. Where's that ladder? I can compare the one that's in my thing to what's in here, I guess. This is the one that the adventure kit has. Let me... Mine's under actors. Where? Boop, 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 boop. Actors. Zones. Outer step builder. Okay. Character class, which that should be fine. It casts to its ladder zone base, which should also be fine. Zone ladder base type. Yeah. Okay. All of... Great transition point. Step up, number, step. Which seems to be valid, because that should be what these guys are. Yeah. So they're getting created. These are step points. I don't fully understand. I don't know what that's about. That's weird. Maybe that's what was launching me. was that the transitions were weird. I've moved it, although I told it to regenerate transitions and it was still being weird. Still launching. Still finding unknown class. Which results in that. So that seems to be the transition being weird was probably what was launching me. But the zone is being, the transitions are being built. And like this should be, that's the exit. So for some reason then, it's not liking it. I don't fully understand. Because it's parented from the class that it uses. And my zones come off of the, you know, the base zone. It's not even like I used custom zone implementations, really. So why would it be mad about that? Interesting. Yeah, I think there's some issue where the pending transition struct doesn't get updated. And that is what is resulting in this. And the reason that the pending transition structs aren't getting updated is in here. Specifically this guy. I don't know why, but it is not returning get possible transition. Plugins. Where does it get that from again? From Adventure Kit character, or the target is, so then presumably that's probably where it's being stored. Let's check. Get possible transition is the name of it. Okay. Yeah, I guess we could have it log very verbose and see if that message comes up. I'm gonna toggle that for now. I can skip it. That's fine. I don't. Yeah. Very. Let's see if this works. Also, I'm going to clear the actual current log. And then step us through. Yeah, because it's looping through this on multiple ticks. And there we go. Boop. Alright. Out of curiosity. Now the transition's not weird again. Alright, let's take a look at our log here. Notify begin. Correcting transition. Clear pending. Applying movement mode. Setting movement mode based on zone. There's the zone. Zone. Setting new zone. Here's where it hits the breakpoint. Script call stack. Can transition exit top. Dot too small. Oh. I'm gonna try something. Where is it? Blueprints. So, theoretically, right, this zone should be equally acceptable because it is based on the same system and it's referencing the character, which I still extend from. I just want to see. I want to see if there's any difference in behavior. Not really. Okay. Toggle breakpoint. It does appear to have generated transitions across to the letter next to it. Interesting. Okay, save that. I guess I'll... Where did that first start? The dot too small thing is kind of interesting. Let me look at the little actual sample project, because the stuff I was looking at was where I've exported it over. But there are some levels that I can reference. Okay, let me look at this one. Is the error margin dot that I'm looking at in this sample project is the same? They seem to be the root values, basically, the default values. And add in about 30 seconds. Ladders. Yeah, these are just... These ladders just use the default settings. So I'm not sure about the... It could be that that actually has nothing to do with my specific problem. Let's see. Is documenting this. Get launched through the floor. Where's that function? Let's see. It's used to update the cache depending transition stocks by direction. Inside it relies on the get native get possible transition from vector, which while all inputs are valid, time is always outputting unknown, even when there are valid transitions in the level for that zone. Okay, now that's documented, and we appear to be back from the ad break. Okay, so this guy has got to be our problem. But it doesn't make a lot of sense because we toggle this, it's already getting toggled, I guess, after he enters the zone the first time. But it's still checking. On the next frame, is that still valid? Yeah. All of that is still valid. In-world direction. Are all of these can't possibly. So every single one of those? I get like some of these returning false. But I just want to check all of them. I want to see all of them once they've actually run through, because that, me just scrolling down and looking at each of them isn't necessarily an answer, but they all seem to be, yeah. They're all coming out as false, which is strange. But the zone is still valid, which is weird. Mm. Excuse me. Let's see. Hmm. Interesting. See, getting transition. False. These are all literals. I guess there could be some math in here that's doing something weird. Hmm. Because, like, everything that passes in here is fine, so theoretically this is correct, but if I messed up the calculations in here somewhere, then of course it could be providing bad data. So very curious. Hello, Amber. Thank you for the fart redeem. Which is funny. I think I saw I think it was a TikTok or something that you share, or you liked it or something, and it was basically a fart joke. I think it was a dude was masking a fart by dropping a pen or something, and then explodes the room he's in. And I saw it said you liked it or something. I was like, that's. I think it was a TikTok. It might have been on Instagram. I don't remember. One of the platforms on which I follow you too. I don't recall which one it was. Let's see. I guess, what we could do, rather than referencing these, how am I doing? I'm doing alright. I got weird things happening here on with my ladder. Music might be sounding crunchy. I mean, I can just give it a little reboot there. We'll see it when the next one comes up. I don't know that song's particularly crunchy. This one has a little bit of static to it on its own, but yeah, I get launched off ladders and then I can't use them again. So I'm currently trying to fix that problem. Okay, so if that's that. Okay, so instead of trying to reference this guy, we could do movement input, split, and then in this case it'd be X is greater than I say 0.5. Theoretically, if you were using a controller, that might not be sensitive enough, but for now that'll work. And then I'll just copy that, and then then for this one, we need to check if it's less than one-time use ladder. Well, you know, the problem is it's not even a fully functional ladder. It launches you off of it. Yep, that's not what I wanted to do. There we go. Oh, wait. Forgot. I gotta... do that. And then... that should only be when direction matches. That should be fine. Okay, let's see what difference this makes. Because this could still be a problem, but I don't think it's going to be. Immediately jumps off. The other half of that equation that I think we're going to have to resolve is I think it's this one. No, zone changed. Let's see. His zone changed. It's not getting reset. Let me see. I have to pull this over here where I can look at it at the same time. It should be doing the exact same thing it's been doing, which is that it just is launching. I'm gonna log that again. Okay. It launches to let go. Transition to null from let go. Try to transition, no transition. Very interesting. Document the rest of this. Let's see. Without using cache transitions for the state rules. Right? I'm no longer checking that anywhere, right? friend has made a social game and we want to add arcade machines, so it would be the best to add them. HTML, JavaScript. Social game and you want to add arcade. So you want to have, let me make sure I'm understanding you correctly. You have an existing game. You want to have arcade machines in the game. And I assume you want them to be able to play like arcade style games within the game. So you want to add like mini games to your game. Okay, you're thinking HTML or JavaScript. I suppose that somewhat depends on like what your game is already running in. I guess you could create the mini games as HTML, and then I assume you would load them in like an in-game browser. Is your idea? So like your arcade machines would basically just be browsers, as I understand it. So you'd load those files locally, or would they be on the web? Like, would it be reaching out to a web server somewhere to pull those? That was what PS Home did. Okay. So that's definitely probably a way to do it. The question I think for that would be kind of twofold, and that is, are you going to load those files locally, or are they going to exist on a web server somewhere? And if the latter, if they're going to exist on a web server somewhere and you're going to load them externally, then one, you're going to have to contend with the security of that. Make sure that like somebody can't edit those, because then the players that are loading that could end up, that's a vulnerability. They could load something, potentially execute something on their local machines that way. And then assuming you were to have a high player base, a player count, then you'd have to make sure that your web server could handle that traffic. Whereas if they just load if those mini games can run locally, just in off of local HTML files in a local browser, then you may be able to avoid all that. Now that means those mini games are not going to be multiplayer per se, unless, I don't think you could make the mini games multiplayer in that way, if that's the case. So if you want the mini games themselves, the arcade games, to be multiplayer, they would probably have to exist on a web server. But at that point, you're also probably going to have more than just basic HTML, because if you want them to be multiplayer, then you're going to have to actually like connect players appropriately, meaning probably going to have more of like a framework involved and probably a database, because you're going to have to relate all that stuff. The other potential issue you might run into, depending on what kind of browser your engine uses, if you're loading the files locally, you might have issues with like the files being considered unsecure, and then the browser might not want to execute them because they wouldn't have a valid SSL cert. That's kind of a non-issue, I think, in the grand scheme of things, because you could fix that pretty simply. I think the first question you would have to answer is, which I'm guessing the answer is yes, is, are those mini games, are those arcade games going to be multiplayer themselves? So within the context of your social game, are the players going to be able to play against each other with those arcade games? Because if yes, they're not going to be able to just be basic like HTML JavaScript, because unless, yeah, I would. So, because like, even if you had a host player, and that host player is loading in the browser session, I don't think that's going to load that same browser session for all players, unless you find some way to replicate that, which I don't know that you can. I guess it would depend on the engine. I don't know that Unreal can do that. I've never tried. Because you would have to have the same browser session for that to work, or your browser game would have to have a system to connect the players together, which would then have to be more complicated. That's my guess. I've certainly never attempted anything like that, but I do have a fair amount of experience with web development. We're about to have an ad break in like 30 seconds. Yeah, so I'm no longer using those anywhere, which is good. I mean, they're here, technically. I don't know if I answered your question at all, really. I felt like I did, but the ad's going to be starting like any minute. Have a look at stuff I don't know. Oh, I will get to you in a minute after the ad break. I'm assuming you're in ads, so after the ad break, I will get to that. Let's see. About 15 seconds left on the ad break. Okay. Yep, we are back from ads. Yeah, so you said you'll have a look at stuff. You don't know if they've done the backing, maybe Plugin or Lua. I think, this is a guess, I think that regardless of what their back end is, assuming that you're just referring to like the base game, right, and not the arcade games, that the larger question is, do those arcade games need to be multiplayer? Like, are the players going to play against each other? Which I assume the answer is yes, because that's what would make it a social game in my mind. And if that's true, then I don't think HTML and JavaScript are going to be enough, because those run locally on the user's machine. And that should mean that each player would have their own instance of the game running, but they would not be interconnected in any way. Now, what you could do, but I think there's going to be a leaderboard. So if there's a leaderboard, then you're going to have a server to store that information. If it's just a leaderboard, then aside from, methodology to try to prevent cheating, you don't necessarily need the games themselves to be much more than like HTML, JavaScript. I will say, if you just make them HTML, JavaScript, they're probably going to be able to cheat at them. Like, because that's all running locally on the user's device. You would probably want to have server-side logic for the game, for the arcade games, if you don't want them to be able to be cheated at. And if that leaderboard is meant to be, like, we'll say global for the sake of argument, but if it's meant to, not just be within a local instance of the game, like if the leaderboard is just within, say, the social server, I guess, let's assume that their players are self-hosting servers, and it's just within the context of that, then I guess it could be tied into like the game's save files in that case. But if we're assuming that it's global and the game is writing their scores back or whatever it may be, to validate that. Because otherwise they could literally pass anything, because even if you rely on like an API that the game talks to, that HTML and JavaScript is running locally on the machine. So they could literally modify the files. Yes, they're running inside a game engine, and that therefore complicates that process, but not in any serious measure. Now, there's the question of effort, right? I was talking to my friend when we're at ads, maybe we could do an emulator. Maybe. I feel like you're trying to have a leaderboard. Presumably, I'm gonna assume it's meant to be like a global leaderboard, because well, okay, so you call it a social game, but is this treated more like MMO style social, where lots of players are on a single server, or is this more like what people are referring to as like friend slop, with like your Peak and Super Battle Golf and such, where players are hosting sessions. If the leaderboard is in the context of the session, you don't have to. It does mean you don't necessarily need a database, right? Because at that point, it's like PlayStation Home and VR Chat. I'll be honest, while I know of those, I don't know a lot about their infrastructure. I never took part in PlayStation Home, and I don't have VR equipment to do VR Chat. PlayStation Home, I would assume, was more global. VR Chat, I could see being more like session, local based. If the players are hosting their own, like, sessions, and the leaderboards are just within the context of those, they can just be save files. You don't necessarily need a database. You're still going to run into an issue of the multiplayer aspect of that point, because you have to get the data from each player's instance of the arcade game. What you could do, if that's the case, is if you ran those browser games, the HTML and JavaScript, if you ran those locally on each machine, you could then have them, the HTML actually send data back into the main game instance that would then feed their score data, what have you, to the host. But you're still running that arcade game locally on the machine because you're using HTML and JavaScript. Doesn't matter if it was on a server or not. Once it loads into the browser, it's running locally on that device. So it could still be cheated at. Now, there's the question of effort. Like, unless you get a serious player base and some serious level of competition, what are the odds that a player can easily cheat at that? Technically speaking, it's easy, but it's not going to be something that, like, your standard user is going to know how to do. So unless someone goes out and creates a tool to do it, it's going to be a little harder. Now, they could probably use something like Cheat Engine, probably, to modify those values. So that would maybe lower that bar. But since they're all happening locally, then there'd be no way to verify those. And then, of course, the question is, if it's not a global leaderboard and it's isolated to people's local sessions, do you really care if they cheat at it? Because then, if they're just hosting their own games of it and playing with their friends only, if their friends are cheating, well, that's within the friend group. That's a problem they should address within their social circle. And at that point, would it be nice to be able to prevent that? Sure. But I wouldn't classify it as like a must-have situation. The music's doing weird things again. Let me restart that. If it's the latter and it's going to be if it's the alternative and it's going to be a global leaderboard, then you're probably going to be sort of expected to prevent cheating. As far as the emulator idea, I guess you're suggesting running emulators of existing games at that point. There is, of course, the legal concern of that, right? If that's what you're getting at. Especially if this is a game you plan to distribute. Like on a marketplace, like Steam, for instance. If it's gonna be an emulator, but it's all gonna be homebrew, then you get around that probably. But you would need to then, because you're distributing the emulator with your game, you would need to be sure of the licensing around that, because those are probably going to vary. I think most emulators are open source, but open source doesn't necessarily mean you can do whatever you want with it, because sometimes those open source licenses, there's different open source licenses, right? So I feel like you've got questions that you have to other questions you have to answer first before you could like nail down the best way of doing that. And that's, you know, going sort of in order. That's, are the arcade games themselves actively multiplayer, or are they just logging scores? It's a lot simpler to just log the scores, but you still have to consider the cheating aspect. Because are these global leaderboards, or are they, you know, self-hosted kind of situations, where people are just playing with their immediate friends? And then if it's the former and you're going to have the global one, what infrastructure do you have to support that? The base game is an MMO. Yeah, so you're going to be expected, let's put it this way, by your player base to prevent cheaters. Which basically means none of that logic for score tracking or anything else should be determined by the client, by the user's device. Never trust, if you're treating this as an MMO, and therefore, you know, it is a global system, and the scoring and everything is going to be global, da 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 da. Never trust the player. You can never assume that the information that the client device will send you is accurate, right? Because if it's running on their local machine, they can technically modify it. Now, you can get into DRM, anti-cheats, and all that nonsense. Those are, you know, entirely different arguments. But those still operate around the central idea that you can't trust what's happening locally on the user's machine. So you're going to need some way on your server side to validate and calculate all that. And replicate that information. So basically what you're going to have to do then is, like, about the only thing that your minigames, because they're going to have to be running on the server, the only thing they should be accepting from your players, regardless of if the players are actively playing the games against each other or just logging a score after the fact, those need to run on the server, and they should only be really accepting the input commands from the player, as in directional or whatever they may be. And then all of the logic of what it does with that has to happen on the server to make that a accurate system, which means they can't be HTML JavaScript. No matter how you slice it, they can't be HTML JavaScript, because if they're loading in the player's game engine, like in the player's game, local game, as HTML JavaScript through a browser that's in the game, then those files, by any metric that I understand of how that type of system would work, because I know how web pages work, would be local on the user's device, and they would be able to interfere with those. So those games have to be, like, there's probably going to be HTML and JavaScript involved in them, because they have they're loading on the web. You could load them as a page. But honestly, at that point, you may be better off just building them directly into the base game. Like, depending on how your system works, maybe you can have levels loaded within levels or something, and then those levels represent the games. Without one, I don't know any Lua, so if that's what he's working on, I have no clue. I'm just saying that he's using Unity. Yeah, I think Unity is similar enough to Unreal. I dabbled with Unity back in the day, but it's similar enough that if it's loading a browser, so if it's loading something in the player's game through a browser, what it's loading, the HTML and JavaScript component of that is going to be local. Now, you could still run all of your mini games, all of your arcade games, through a browser, but none of the game logic should be being handled by HTML and JavaScript. Have that be the visual aspect, sure. Don't allow it to be the game logic. Now, how would you do that? I'm not sure what framework would be appropriate for that, unless you, I don't know, made it in Java or something. What you could do, but you're talking about a lot of performance overhead. But I mean, if you're talking MMO, then I mean, you're kind of already out the door on that one. You could, because Unity can make like HTML or browser-based games, right? You could make each of your mini games as Unity games that run in the browser, though you'll still want them to talk to some kind of server, and then load those. But you're talking about a lot of performance. Hello, Raiders. Hello, Key. We were chatting about game dev, as expected. You were playing Resident Evil, I believe? Resident Evil 2? The original, I assume? How are you, Raiders? Hello, Key. As well, we were chatting about game dev. I was providing some suggestions. The 98 edition. I will say, don't know that I ever played the 98 one. I know I played like the original Resident Evil, but I don't know that I ever played RE2, the original RE2. I kind of just knew of it from like osmosis, pretty much. And of course, I've played the remake, but I don't know that I ever. It was one of those things like the original Resident Evils. As much as they have a place in my heart, they obviously because of what I'm working on, the tank controls. You had never played the original RE2? Makes sense. Yeah, tank controls are always kind of a mess. But yeah, so reality, that is what I would say is that you're going to need to consider if this is truly meant to be an MMO, and I'm using air quotes because you could be saying you're going to have a ton of players, but that may not mean much because MMO is massive, right? That's the whole idea. So that can mean thousands of players, hundreds of players. You know, is the reality that you'll actually have that many? But that means you're going to have the infrastructure for that anyway. So if you're trying to load arcade games, mini games inside that, I would not plan to rely on HTML JavaScript as being those games. That could be a component of it, but I would not allow that to be what handles the game logic, and especially not the scoring for your leaderboard. That will get cheated so fast. Because there'd be basically no difficulty to that. Hello, Save. I assume you came along with the raid. It doesn't indicate that you're one of the raiders, but I assume maybe you just came in after the raid, but I assume you were in Key's stream. So I have shenanigans happening over here, trying to get this ladder working, and we keep getting launched off of it, so that's a thing. And then once we get launched off of it, we can't use it again. So it's not affecting this, is it? I can still come over here and pick this stuff up? Yeah. Okay. That's good, at least. I was going to say, I hadn't bothered to check if that was interfering with anything else. And yeah, that's... For some reason it didn't automatically send you over. That's not nice. Yeah, so... What I'm trying to do here is use a plugin called the Adventure Kit, which unfortunately is no longer in like active development. But I don't really need it to be, because it still works. And what I'm trying to do is get it where, because it has this system that I really like called zones, which I guess I could have just probably made my own, but this would save time, was the hope. Why reinvent the wheel, where you can define special movement types. In this case, a ladder, things like ledges, etc. Crawling in vents. And then it's able to, like, if I were to put more than one of these, say, put this here, for instance, it will, if I do this and have it rebuild all transitions. Oh, well, it did weird things. I may not have put them close enough to each other. Rebuild transitions. It was working a minute ago. Basically, the idea is that if you had like two of these next to each other, it would dynamically create the ability for you to move between them. Did I get the flashlight fixed? Yes and no. There's still some weirdness with it. Hold on. Let me kill this. Controller. Let's turn off the character info so that we can see what the hell we're doing. And then, so basically, we can pick up stuff like we could before. Right now, flashlight, when it's not equipped, it's not like on or anything. It kind of hovers off the player's hand. That I know what I need to do to fix that. I just haven't done it yet. Partially because I'm thinking of having it be in like the pocket when it's and be technically invisible there when it's not in use, so that he plays an animation as if he's taking it out. But it turns on. It is brighter, which is good, and we can now aim with it. We're actually also a bit more accurate than we were before when aiming like this, which is good. It is also brighter in here, so it's a little more usable. It's not like terribly bright, but it is more usable, which is fine. We don't have to have that many areas that are actually pitch dark. There's still a weirdness with the indirect light, and like in the sense that you can see the back end of the flashlight is lit up, and it also is creating a light source on his side there for some reason. Not terribly sure why I can't seem to avoid that without just getting, I mean, I can get rid of the point light, but that kind of, I don't know, defeats the purpose. My other thought has been maybe instead of a point light for the flashlight, I need to have a even wider like spotlight cone, and that might resolve that. But it still means that all of the light from that is isolated directly in front of you, which can make things very like oppressive from like a horror game standpoint, but also doesn't seem accurate, like, because light bounces, and that light really doesn't without that point light. So kind of not sure just yet. The answer may be simply that we can't do pitch dark rooms. That shouldn't be the case. I'm sure I'm missing something. But I'm not certain what it is just yet. So going to have to keep working on that. But right now, I'm trying to get these zones, this zone system sorted out, because once I can get one of these working, in this case the ladder, which is one of the more complicated ones, I can start implementing other movement modes pretty easily from there, because they're all kind of based off of the same systems. And that'll be kind of a huge implementation in step in terms of overall game systems. And then honestly, like, the flashlight thing is, at this point, I'm viewing it more as like a polish thing, and I'm gonna like come back to it later, because we got it. The big issue was the ability for the player to aim when using the flashlight, because that animation was broken, where like the arm would get really big and get all messed up on the torso. We have fixed that. Like, we can aim without the flashlight. We can now aim with the flashlight. So that's all good. We have fixed that part. And it looks decent. There's some weirdness, because I have to like reposition the flashlight between what it's posed for there and what it's posed for there, and boy does it show if you're paying attention. Like you can see it move back into position. I can definitely do something about it. I can make it instant rather than like slowly reposition it, because I'm performing like a rotation and stuff on it. But yeah, theoretically, those rotations and stuff shouldn't be necessary in the grand scheme of things. The main reason I had to do that is because, I'm using placeholder animations that I did not create, and the bone on the skeleton that flashlight gets attached to wasn't positioned correctly when it's aimed in that aiming animation. And so it was causing the flashlight to be like down here, basically, away from the hand. So I'm having to then like reposition all that as it transitions to and from, which is fine for now. But when I eventually replace the animations with appropriate ones, we should be able to just remove that entirely as a necessity. But for now, to make it look right for the demo, I think that'll be sufficient. Short of fixing the drift, which, to be honest, you'd have to like be trying to see it. Like, you can catch it right there as it starts to go down, like right under his arm, if you're watching for it. But because of the way the camera lock works, when you're aiming, you can't rotate around him. And when he first relaxes, you can't rotate around him either, until it kind of times out. So by the time you actually get to rotate to look at his front, he's already finished positioning it. So it might be fine. Hard to say. I haven't decided. But that kind of summarizes what we got going on. And we're at like the 3-hour mark almost. But if we go to the 3-hour mark, we're going to have an ad break. So I want to try to get us out of here because it is 10 o'clock for me. I need to go to sleep. So thank you, Raiders. I apologize that we couldn't stick around a little longer. Let's see who we can raid. Ooh, let's raid Shell, because they are playing Resi 6. Have a good night, everybody. Let's stick around for the raid if you can. And I will be live again on Thursday. Boop.